I think they believe if there's a way to salvage this team, this era of Durant and Irving, that there was one candidate out there who could do that, who had the potential to do it, and that's Ime Udoka.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. I didn't expect to have to make another Brooklyn Nets video so soon. For whatever reason, it feels like this team can't go a day without grabbing headlines. Whenever I think of the Nets at this point, I just think of that Futurama sign that says 0 days since last incident. In Nash's first season with the Nets, he would lead the team to a 48-24 record. After the 2020-2021 regular season would conclude, Nash would actually finish 6th in the NBA for Coach of the Year voting. Now I know Coach of the Year doesn't mean much, but still that's not too bad. All time, Nash would finish with a 92-62 record with the Brooklyn Nets, failing to reach the conference finals, but as I say every single Nets video, they would come awfully close. If KD's foot isn't on the line here, Harden has better health, or Kai never lands on Giannis, perhaps Nash is still coaching the Brooklyn Nets to this day, and the story that has already been written ends completely differently. But as things stand, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for Nash, his time as the Brooklyn Nets head coach would be effectively over. November 1st, Shams would report that Nets and head coach Steve Nash have agreed to go their separate ways. Following that report, he would go on to say that Vaughn would serve as the Nets head coach for their game versus Chicago. The Nets would go on to lose this game, and Kyrie would have maybe his worst game ever, going 2 of 12 from the field and 0 of 6 from 3. Maybe Kai's had worse games, but I can't remember the last time I saw him scoreless in the first half of one. Here's a reminder that a few games before this, Kyrie would have a back and forth with a reporter who was trying to get to the bottom of his post on Twitter. I won't show you guys the entire thing at this moment, but let's just say that it got ugly.
You guys come in here and make up this powerful influence I have over top of the adultery of, oh, you cannot post that. Why not? Why not?
As a result, Kyrie wouldn't speak to the media the following game.
I think, we've tried to do a little bit of both, to be honest. Like by keeping him, he did not do media last night. He's not going to do media tonight. And at some point he will come up here and do media again. But I think at this point it's we don't want to cause, more fuss right now, more interaction with people. Like, let's let him simmer down and let's let this whole, let's let cooler minds prevail. And I think we need to go out and become, educate ourselves, educate the whole group, and get some direction, seek from the experts,
Bear in mind that the same game that I was just referencing would have people sitting courtside wearing shirts that said, "Fight anti-Semitism."
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyrie.
Thank you, Kyrie.
Thank you.
We have to. Thanks, Kyrie.
Regardless of what Kai's intentions were, he has to understand that his actions have consequences. Just because you don't see the consequences of them, that doesn't mean that there aren't any. If you don't like the attention that your platform brings, then you don't have to use it. I'm not the biggest fan of coincidences, so I don't think it's a surprise that the Nets are struggling with all of the instability surrounding this franchise. There's a lack of leadership, a lack of cohesion, and just an absurd amount of hypocrisy. Oftentimes we joke about how dysfunctional the Lakers have been, but if you ask me, I think that the Brooklyn Nets take the cake. The Nets are so dysfunctional that I'm actually starting to see people call Steve Nash a scapegoat. If this firing happened after the Nets got swept last season when it should have, I just feel like people would have shared a different sentiment. Now, that's not to say that Nash isn't getting some nasty blame, because he 100% is. Now, before anybody starts to think that I'm hating on Steve Nash, guys, without a doubt, Steve Nash is one of my favorite point guards to ever play the game. I always have respect for him for leading what was one of the most exciting offenses of my lifetime. In no way is he at fault for all of Brooklyn's shortcomings, but it is hard to overlook some of the things that he struggled with as a head coach. To be fair, I'm sure some of the best coaches in the world would have even struggled in this Brooklyn environment. In the words of Steve Kerr, you throw either of us in that situation and we wouldn't have done any better. The irony here is that there was a clear reason that Nash ended up being the favorite for that situation in the first place, as the Nets, or Kyrie in his own words, wanted to feel as if the Nets didn't have a true head coach. Joe Harris would call Nash's tenure in Brooklyn a whirlwind. It's pretty funny that if Nash won a championship in Brooklyn, that he probably would have gotten minimal credit. Regardless of whoever is coaching, it always sucks to see a coach lose their locker room. And it's pretty clear that's what happened in Brooklyn. Sean Marks says that Nash told him that the team was not responding to him. That had to be a brutal admission from somebody who had to see their time coming to an end. Shortly after Shams would announce that Nash and the Nets would go their separate ways, he would also announce that Ime Udoka would be a strong frontrunner to be the next Brooklyn Nets head coach. And that while discussions have started, that the Nets are still doing their due diligence to see who's out there. Shortly after announcing this, Shams would take things up a notch, stating that the Brooklyn Nets plan to hire Ime Udoka as their new head coach, and that Boston granted the Nets permission to speak with Udoka, and that they will allow him to leave freely regardless of any looming suspension. Now here's the catch: despite all of these reports, Sean Marks would come out and say that at this time, there has been no decision made on our next head coach.
No, absolutely not. No.
I know that I can't be the only one thinking that Sean Marks saw all of this media backlash and was like, well, wait a minute.
Look, it's understandable, you know. I'm completely empathetic to what's going on here. I'm certainly not proud of the situation we find ourselves in, you know. I would like to turn, you know, ESPN or the TV on and not find you talking about us, you know, in that manner, to be quite frank. You know, I'd like to get back to basketball. I think that's what our players would like to get back to. They'd like to focus on the things that are important here, and that's competing at the highest level and playing basketball games.
In my opinion, it just doesn't make sense to say this about one media storm and then willingly enter another. Imagine you are the Brooklyn Nets, and you are in the middle of a media nightmare, and have been there for a while. And then you go and hire the guy who has been knee-deep in problems. I'm not a chef or anything, but this just doesn't sound like a recipe for success. Regardless of everything, this is all just extra attention that the Brooklyn Nets don't need. And I'd even go further to argue that even from a basketball standpoint, by not taking the high road on all accounts, you are putting your players and franchise employees, and even fans, in potentially tough spots that will have an impact down the line. Now, speaking of from a basketball standpoint, according to Woj, the hope is that Ime Udoka can tighten the Nets defensively and command the respect of the franchise's key players. Udoka spent the season on Nash's staff before accepting the Celtics job and winning the Eastern Conference. With his suspension, his time in Boston was essentially over. Ian Begley notes that when he was an assistant coach with the Brooklyn Nets, he wasn't shy about coaching Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving with an edge and challenging them. If you ask me from a basketball standpoint, Ime was phenomenal last year. But even with that in mind, there's no promise that if he were to coach the Brooklyn Nets that he fixes every single problem that they have. Also, there's that looming possibility that as discussions around Ime start to heat up, now or at some point in the future, that more details will come out, and perhaps those details won't be in your favor. I do think it's interesting that the Celtics would just let Ime go to a rival. That raises a ton of questions in itself. Questions that really I'm sure we'll have answers for fairly soon. I've seen some people say that the Celtics just didn't want to pay Ime. I've seen others saying that they just want to be done with the situation, and some saying that what he did may be worse than we know. When it comes to this at this point in time, who really knows? With the Ime Udoka news breaking, Jaylen Brown would post this to his IG story. In the comments below, let me know what you guys think that JB is alluding to here, if anything at all. Also guys, be sure to let me know what you think of everything going on. Clicking the video on the screen right now is a great way to support my channel. I'm GetLikeCoop, bringing you guys the scoop until our next upload.